All Indiana Politics
is your premier source for Indiana politics.
Focusing on issues that matter to you.
I still want us to be the best in the Midwest.
We can't afford another lockdown.
Give the citizens of this country the relief they need.
Education in the state of Indiana remains priority number one.
In-depth, nonpartisan coverage.
We don't know exactly where the economy will be in January.
People are worried with good reason.
Exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders.
We have the resources here in the state of Indiana to care for those who are in need.
Expert analysis on critical legislation.
We need to reform those laws.
This recovery is going to take some time.
We've got to anticipate that there'll be a budget shortfall.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
I'm Wish TV's Phil Sanchez. Geist area businessman Patrick Malayter has filed to run in the May Republican primary for Indiana's 5th Congressional District seat. Malayter has joined a crowded field for the Republican primary, including incumbent Victoria Spartz. I sat down with him for our All Indiana Politics show. Patrick Malayter, thank you so much for being here with us. Good to meet you. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. So what I like to do with these interviews is kind of let the folks at home who maybe don't know much about you, just kind of give them a little idea as far as who Patrick Malayter is.
Sure. Well, I was born in Gary, Indiana. I grew up right by the steel mills there. My father worked at U.S. Steel. It was a very ethnically diverse neighborhood overall, much different from where I live now on the Geist Reservoir.
Yeah.
Ended up going to school in Maryville, Indiana at Andrean, and then I went to IU Bloomington, where I received an accounting degree with distinction. Shortly after graduation, I took and passed the CPA exam and married my high school girlfriend. Mm-hmm. So we've been together now for 45 years.
Yeah, 5 kids,
5 kids, yeah,
the whole off camera.
Yep, wow. Absolutely.
Well,
so
good for you. Retired now from being a CPA.
Yes.
And you want to get into politics. You're running for Victoria Spartz's seat.
Correct.
Why? You're running as a Republican.
Yes.
Why did you want to get into this?
Well, probably like 90% of the people in the country, I had a general concern about how things had been running overall, and what prompted me to get into the race probably started back in July. I started to listen to this particular podcast that talked about one of the problems with the Republican Party being not enough people willing to step up and, put themselves at risk to help fix the country.
Right.
So heard that a bunch of different times. Then Victoria Spartz had said she was not going to run again. So I ended up looking at the planks of a number of the other candidates, and I thought they were rather generic and wouldn't really advance the ball for the country. The final thing for me was when my son and I took a trip to Italy in the summer, bicycle trip, and I went to a number of the big cities, and they were clean and safe and just so much different from what we're seeing here in the United States now, that was the final straw that got me back into the race.
Okay, so first off, why do you think that is? Why do you think that the cities in Italy were a little bit more clean than ours here?
Well, I think we have let our standards slip here in the country, generally.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that way 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So you kind of consider yourself a little bit of an outsider?
Yes, for sure.
You have some different ideas. What piqued my interest was the term limit stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, if you look back at the country a little over 20 years ago, when President Clinton first left office, there were a lot of different things. The world was at peace, people got along, but we had generated 4 consecutive years of budget surpluses. In fact, at the time, the head of the Federal Reserve said that we were going to pay off all the national debt by 2006, and then we would be generating surpluses of such volume that we could start to pre-fund Social Security. Mm-hmm. What then happened was President Bush took office. First thing out of the box, massive tax cut. I was a 1%er income-wise at the time, and I was pissed about that simply because I knew what was going to happen to the nation's finances. And sure enough, that's what happened. We went from a big surplus to a big deficit in 1 year. Then we went into wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, through some social spending, and then boom, COVID was the icing on the cake. To instead of having a balanced budget, back in 2006, we're $34 trillion in debt. That was one of the issues that really prompted me to get into the race, just dealing with the national debt issue. And for all intents and purposes, presidents certainly have a role in this mess.
Yeah.
But Congress really devotes and determines how we spend money.
Right. All politics is mostly local.
Right.
So how does term limits help with that? And what else would you suggest we do in order to get the spending and the deficit down?
Well, the first issue is I have very little confidence that the existing members of Congress can make a difference in terms of actually working together to resolve a problem. I am much more willing to take a chance on younger minds, different minds that might have a interest in solving problems for the country, having different ideas, different voices enter into this, as opposed to the tribes we have here now in Washington, D.C.
Right.
So that's one. I think there's a few things that we can do to start to reduce the deficit. So, for example, I was a national director of a large CPA firm's tax practice. One of the things that you notice in that particular role is that there are just a lot of really greasy loopholes in there that largely benefit the top half of the top 1% of people in the country. And there are hundreds of billions of dollars of those items in the budget. Well, that's one area we can start to raise revenue without necessarily changing any of the tax rates for people or deductions for regular people.
Closing those loopholes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Massive loopholes with literally hundreds of billions of dollars at stake. So that's one. Also, during the Clinton administration, they had pay-as-you-go type policies where, again, if you wanted to spend additional revenue, you had to find some offset so that you weren't increasing spending. So that's another simple step that we can take.
Okay.
There's also just a number of areas where we do spend money right now that could be reevaluated.
Yeah, you also, prior to coming on and us having just a conversation briefly off camera, you mentioned that you have some other ideas that are a little bit different, that are not in line with the GOP, the traditional GOP. What are those?
Well, I probably have a much different viewpoint with respect to women's reproductive rights than any of the candidates in the race. So, as you know, Indiana enacted a pretty much near total abortion ban in the state, and for all intents and purposes put Planned Parenthood out of existence. So, certainly my wife and I, as you mentioned, have 5 children. I certainly embrace the sanctity of life, and I'm not pro-abortion. However, I am pro-choice. So what I mean by that is I think women need to have reproductive rights in a manner that are safe, legal up to a point, and rare. So what do I mean by safe? Well, that means that you should be able to go to a medical facility, including a Planned Parenthood, to have those types of services provided. From the standpoint of timing, I generally lean with a 12 to 14 week time frame to receive that type of care, irrespective of what the circumstances are, with additional time based on the viability of the child and the mother's health.
Right.
So, but if you think about the termination of Planned Parenthood here in Indiana, what a sexist thing to have done. Planned Parenthood just did not do abortions. They provided a whole series of other health care for women. So, for example, prenatal and postnatal care, contraceptive advice, cancer screening. So all of those types of services that were available to women went away through the process. And again, I think it was sexist to have done that.
Yeah. When you have these conversations on the campaign trail or with other fellow GOP members, what do they say? Do they give you any pushback when you bring these topics?
Well, I can't say that I've discussed these issues with many of the other candidates in the race, simply because I know that they are diametrically opposed from my viewpoints in the area. And look, I realize everyone in this race is entitled to their own beliefs. But to expect that any one candidate must agree with A, B, C, D, and E to be an authentic Republican or an authentic Democrat is just not sensible.
Yeah.
That means you're a robot, not someone that thinks for themselves. And again, I respect anyone's opinion in this particular area because it's very personal. Nevertheless, to completely lock women out of having a choice, I just disagree with.
Yeah. I'm almost out of time. So
Sure.
Just quickly, what do you want folks to know about you, and also just give us an idea of how things are going on the campaign trail?
Sure. So again, my key issues are term limits. Secondly, I've got some public safety issues that are of significance to essentially hold prosecutors financially liable for these criminals that are going through the system on a revolving door basis, so that there are financial penalties that a citizen can recover from these prosecutors. I also have things related to education reform and tax reform, as we've talked about here. As far as how things are going on the campaign trail, I have a very grassroots campaign. I talk to a lot of individuals throughout the district, and I will tell you, it cleanses your soul because you hear a lot of different issues from the standpoint of how people are dealing with inflation, concerns about how they're going to send their kids to college, concerns about the border. So there are a number of issues that I guess there's a number of themes that you hear. But the economy probably is number one, and then probably the border being number two.
Yeah. Well, Patrick, good to see you. Thank you so much for coming in.
Be well. Thank you. Yep.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.